Selling things on Craigslist had always been a straightforward way for me to make some extra cash. I've had my fair share of harmless encounters, quirky buyers, and awkward negotiations, but nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare I was about to experience. It started innocuously enough. I was selling an old laptop, a relic from my college days that had served me well but was now collecting dust. I posted it with a few pictures and a reasonable price. Within hours, I received a message from a potential buyer named Jason. He seemed friendly enough, and we quickly agreed on a price and a time to meet. Jason insisted on meeting at my apartment, claiming he was in a rush and didn't have time to go elsewhere. I was hesitant, but finally relented, making sure to schedule our meeting during the day. Safety first, I reminded myself. It was a sunny afternoon when he arrived. I could see him through the peephole, a man in his late 30s with a clean-shaven face and a friendly smile. He didn't look like a threat. I unlocked the door, my unease momentarily forgotten. "Hi, I'm Jason," he said, extending his hand. I shook it and let him in, leading him to the living room where I had the laptop set up. He inspected it thoroughly, turning it on and checking all the specs. His intense focus was a bit unsettling, but I brushed it off. After a few minutes, he nodded in approval. "This looks great," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've got the cash right here." He handed me an envelope and I counted the money inside. It was all there, every dollar accounted for. Just as I was about to hand over the laptop, he suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip like a vice. "Actually," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling calm, "I think I'll take more than just the laptop." Panic surged through me as I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. He yanked me closer, his other hand producing a small knife. The blade glinted menacingly in the sunlight streaming through the window. "Don't scream," he warned, his eyes now devoid of any friendliness. "If you do, things will get ugly." Terror-stricken, I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. He started dragging me towards the door, the knife pressed against my side. My mind raced, searching for any way out of this horrifying situation. As we reached the hallway, I noticed my phone on the kitchen counter. In a desperate move, I kicked back at him, hitting his shin. He stumbled, loosening his grip just enough for me to break free. I dashed for the phone, but he was fast, grabbing me by the hair and pulling me back violently. "Big mistake," he hissed, raising the knife. I thought my life was about to end right there. But then a loud banging echoed from the front door. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, must have heard the commotion. Jason froze, his eyes darting towards the door. "Who's there?" Mr. Thompson's voice boomed from the other side. "Is everything all right?" Jason's grip faltered, giving me the split second I needed. I twisted free and screamed, "Help! He has a knife!" The door burst open, and Mr. Thompson, a burly man in his 50s, stormed in. Jason panicked, shoving me aside as he made a run for it. Mr. Thompson lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, but Mr. Thompson managed to pin him down until the police arrived. Jason was arrested, and it turned out he was wanted for several other crimes, including attempted kidnapping and assault. The police told me I was incredibly lucky to have escaped with only minor injuries. The incident left me shaken to my core. I moved out of that apartment shortly after, unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability every time I walked through the door. I stopped using Craigslist altogether, the once convenient platform now tainted by the trauma of that day. I learned a hard lesson about trust and safety, one that would stay with me forever. Meeting strangers through the internet is always a gamble, and sometimes the stakes are terrifyingly high. Now, whenever I think about that day, I can't help but shudder, grateful to be alive and wiser for it. I've always loved finding hidden gems on Craigslist. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of scoring a great deal. It's addicting. My latest find was an antique mirror, advertised as a beautiful, ornate piece from the early 1900s. The seller, Jonathan, described it as being in perfect condition, with a dark, polished wooden frame intricately carved with floral patterns. It was the kind of piece that would look perfect in my living room. After exchanging a few emails, we agreed to meet at Jonathan's place. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a rural area. I didn't think much of it. Many people in the area lived in more isolated spots. He suggested I come in the late afternoon, as he'd be home from work by then. I drove out there on a crisp, clear day, the kind where the sun is just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows. His house was a large, old farmhouse, set back from the road and partially hidden by trees. It had an almost picturesque quality to it, though something about it felt off. I shook off the uneasy feeling, attributing it to the isolation and the looming twilight. Jonathan greeted me at the door with a wide smile. He was a tall man, maybe in his late 40s, with a lean build and a firm handshake. Come in, he said warmly. The mirror's in the living room. It's too big to move around easily, so I thought you could take a look at it first. I followed him inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The house was cluttered, filled with old furniture and knickknacks, all of which seemed to belong to another era. We made our way to the living room, where the mirror was propped against a wall. It was just as beautiful as the pictures had shown, if not more so. I examined it closely, admiring the craftsmanship. It's perfect, I said. I'll take it. Jonathan's smile widened. Great, let's get it wrapped up for you. As he went to fetch some packing materials, I took another look around the room. That's when I noticed it, the door to the basement, slightly ajar. I could hear a faint noise coming from below, like the sound of someone moving around. My curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to the door, trying to peer down into the darkness. You shouldn't go down there. Jonathan's voice came from behind me, startling me. He had returned with bubble wrap and a roll of tape. There was a sharp edge to his tone now, a hint of something darker beneath his friendly exterior. I wasn't going to, I said quickly, stepping back. Just heard something, that's all. He gave me a hard look. Then his expression softened back into a smile. Nothing to worry about. Probably just the old house settling. Let's get this mirror ready for you. I helped him wrap the mirror, but the earlier sense of unease had returned, stronger than before. As we worked, I noticed more oddities about the house. Strange stains on the floor, locks on the outside of the bedroom doors, and a distinct lack of personal items. It was as if no one really lived there, or if they did, they were trying to hide something. Finally, we had the mirror ready to go. Jonathan insisted on helping me carry it out to my car. As we approached my vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. My instincts screamed at me to leave as quickly as possible. Just as we were loading the mirror into the trunk, Jonathan's grip on the frame tightened. You know, he said slowly, I don't think I can let you leave just yet. Panic surged through me. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight, no nearby houses, no passing cars. It was just the two of us, alone in the fading light. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He grinned, and it was a smile devoid of any warmth. I've been looking for someone like you. Someone who wouldn't be missed right away. This mirror was just bait. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and yanked me towards the house. I struggled, adrenaline flooding my veins, but he was stronger than he looked. I managed to wrench my arm free for a moment and made a desperate dash for my car. Jonathan lunged after me, but I was quicker. I slammed the car door shut, locking it just as he reached the handle. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking, and started the engine. Jonathan pounded on the window, his face twisted with rage. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching, and sped down the driveway. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of a well-lit gas station. My hands were still trembling as I called the police and reported what had happened. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate, but I never heard back. To this day, the thought of that old farmhouse sends shivers down my spine. I deleted my Craigslist account and never looked back. Some deals just aren't worth the risk. I've always been a thrifty person, and Craigslist was my go-to for finding hidden treasures. Over the years, I've bought and sold countless items without a hitch. That changed one summer evening when I listed an old bike for sale. I never imagined that what seemed like a routine transaction would spiral into a nightmarish ordeal. It was a Thursday evening when I posted the ad. Within minutes, I received a message from someone named Daniel. He seemed polite, asking if the bike was still available and if he could come by to see it that night. My gut told me it was a bit too quick, but I brushed it off. After all, quick sales were a good thing, right? Daniel arrived at my house around 8 p.m. He drove a beat-up white van, which gave me a slight pause. The vehicle was typical for someone hauling large items, but something about it felt off. I dismissed my unease, reminding myself that I had met plenty of people from Craigslist before without any issues. He stepped out of the van, a tall, lanky man in his late 30s with an unkempt beard and shifty eyes. He greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I led him to the garage where the bike was stored. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though it was just the two of us. Daniel inspected the bike meticulously, asking several detailed questions. His knowledge about bikes was impressive, almost as if he were an enthusiast. After what felt like an eternity, he agreed to the asking price and pulled out a wad of cash. As I counted the money, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. "Do you mind helping me load it into the van?" he asked. His tone was friendly, but there was an undercurrent of something sinister. "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. We lifted the bike together and carried it to the back of the van. As we reached the rear, I noticed the inside was cluttered with various tools and junk, but what caught my eye was the heavy-duty lock on the inside of the door. It seemed excessive for just transporting goods. Suddenly, Daniel's demeanor changed. He dropped the bike and lunged at me, knocking me off balance. Before I could react, he had me pinned against the van, a knife pressed to my throat. "Don't make a sound," he hissed, his breath hot and rancid against my face. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding in my chest. I struggled, but he was stronger than he looked. With one hand, he fumbled to open the van's door, the knife still held firmly against my skin. My mind raced, desperate for a way out. Summoning every ounce of strength, I kicked him hard in the shin. He yelped in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to twist away. I bolted toward the house, screaming for help. Behind me, I heard him curse and start after me. I made it to the door, fumbling with my keys in a desperate attempt to get inside. Just as I turned the lock, I felt his hand clamp down on my shoulder, yanking me backward. We both tumbled to the ground and the knife clattered away into the darkness. My survival instincts kicked in, and I fought with everything I had. We grappled on the ground, each of us trying to gain the upper hand. I managed to land a solid punch to his jaw, momentarily stunning him. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled to my feet and dashed inside, slamming the door behind me. I locked the door and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. My breath came in ragged gasps as I relayed my situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way, but those minutes felt like hours. I could hear Daniel outside, banging on the door, screaming obscenities. Fear gnawed at me, but I knew I had to stay calm. I barricaded myself in a room, clutching a kitchen knife for protection. The police arrived quickly, their sirens a welcome sound. They apprehended Daniel without much struggle. Later, I learned that Daniel had a history of violent crimes and had used Craigslist to lure in victims before. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't believe how close I had come to being another one of his victims. The experience left me shaken, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in seemingly ordinary interactions. I've since become more cautious, always meeting buyers and sellers in public places and never alone. Craigslist can be a useful tool, but it's crucial to stay vigilant and trust your instincts. I've always been cautious when it comes to selling things online. You hear stories, right? But I never thought something like this would happen to me. It was an old desk I was selling on Craigslist, a solid piece, but it didn't fit my new apartment's aesthetic. I listed it for $1.50, a fair price for a quick sale. Within an hour, I got a response from a guy named Mark. His message was polite and to the point. "Hey, I'm interested in the desk. Is it still available?" I replied that it was, and we arranged for him to come by that evening to pick it up. He seemed normal enough in our brief exchanges, and his eagerness to buy it without haggling made me think he was genuinely interested. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his mid-30s, clean-shaven with a friendly smile. I opened the door, and he introduced himself as Mark. He seemed harmless, if not a little too friendly. We made small talk as I led him to the spare room where the desk was. He commented on my apartment, making me a little uncomfortable with how closely he seemed to be observing everything. As we reached the room, he seemed impressed by the desk. "This is perfect," he said, running his hands over the wood. "Mind if I test it out?" I found it a strange request, but I nodded. He sat down, opened a drawer, and then looked at me with a serious expression. "Can you grab me a glass of water? Long drive," he said with a sheepish smile. I hesitated but decided to be polite. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass, and returned to find him standing in the hallway, not by the desk. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my neck and the world went dark. When I came to, I was in the back of a van, hands and feet bound with zip ties, my head throbbing. The van was moving, and the only light was from a small window near the ceiling. Panic set in as I struggled against the restraints. "Don't bother," a voice said from the front. It was Mark. "The more you struggle, the tighter they get." I tried to scream, but the gag in my mouth muffled my cries. Mark glanced back at me, his friendly demeanor completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You should have been more careful," he he said almost casually. Meeting strangers from the internet? Not smart. I don't know how long we drove. It felt like hours. The van finally stopped, and I heard Mark get out. Moments later, the back doors opened, and he pulled me out roughly. We were in a secluded area, dense with trees. There was a small, dilapidated cabin nearby. Mark dragged me inside, throwing me onto a dusty mattress. The place was bare, just a couple of old pieces of furniture and the overwhelming smell of decay. He locked the door behind him and started rummaging through a bag, pulling out various tools and rope. "You see," he began, not even looking at me. "People like you make it too easy. Trusting, desperate to make a quick sale, letting strangers into your home." He approached me with a knife, and I flinched, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Instead of using it on me, he cut the zip ties on my wrists and ankles, but left the gag. The sudden freedom made me almost dizzy. "Don't try anything stupid," he warned, holding the knife up. "Now, you're going to listen very carefully." He spent the next few minutes outlining his twisted plan. He intended to keep me here for ransom, convinced my family would pay to get me back. What he didn't know was that I lived alone and my family was hundreds of miles away. As he turned to grab something from his bag, I saw my chance. There was a rusty, broken lamp on a table within reach. I grabbed it and swung with all my strength, hitting him on the side of the head. He stumbled, dropping the knife, and I bolted for the door. I ran faster than I ever had, not daring to look back. The forest seemed endless, but I finally stumbled upon a road. I flagged down the first car I saw, a kind elderly couple who called the police. Mark was arrested later that night. It turned out he was wanted for several other kidnappings, all lured by Craigslist ads. I was lucky to escape with my life, but the experience left me shaken. I've never used Craigslist again, and every time I hear a knock at the door, I can't help but remember that night.